Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining our presentation today. We are presenting on a seed grant that we were offered and funded by the NYAR Research Center. And our presentation today will focus on our work on this grant, in which we developed a collaborative focusing on trauma-informed and mental health research. And in today's presentation, we're going to discuss the first phase of this collaborative and the project that was funded through this AYRC grant, in which we are developing some professional development modules on the areas and topics of trauma-informed practice and mental wellness to provide for the local community. So first, let's start by introducing the members of this collaborative and the recipients of this grant. Regina Rahimi, who is a professor in the Department of Middle and Secondary Education. Dr. Dolores Liston, who is a professor in the Department of Curriculum, Foundations, and Reading. Dr. Tamara Hunt, who is an associate professor of athletic training in the Department of Health Sciences and Kinesiology. And Dr. April Garrity, who is a professor of communication sciences and disorders in the Department of Rehabilitation. So we all came together to form this collaborative, and this relationship began when we met during a recent mental health conference. That mental health symposium came out of a smaller symposium that Dolores Liston and I and a couple of other people in the local community started, known as TIES, which is the Trauma Informed Educational Symposium. And that symposium was largely suited for local area teachers who we wanted to just be able to provide some information and training on trauma-informed practice. That symposium joined some other local groups, forming a Road to Resilience mental health conference this past year. And that's when we came to meet Drs. Hunt and Garrity, who are also interested in work related to trauma-informed practice and mental health well-being. And we found that while we're all in different areas and different fields and different colleges, we really have this shared interest in that work. And so through our conversations, we just began to wonder and ponder how we can pool together our expertise and our interests to develop something that could be more meaningful and impactful through collaborative work. And we were fortunate that NYAR offered this seed grant, and that seemed like it was very timely and appropriate for the work that we were hoping to do. And in fact, we were able to secure funding through them to develop this collaborative. And so we have called this the Trauma-Informed and Mental Well-Being Collaborative at Georgia Southern, because we are hoping to not only provide training on trauma-informed practice, but other areas of mental health and well-being in the future. So first, we'll share with you some of our immediate goals for this project, and that would be to initially develop these professional development modules. And in a few minutes, I'm going to share with you what the topics of those development modules are and who we hope to access and participate in those. So we're going to initially develop these modules. We also want to survey the community organizations and members to determine the professional needs of our stakeholders in the local community, including what we're doing here today, in hopes that some of you can provide some input related to the needs of your particular organizations and institutions. And importantly, what we've had to do initially is determine the roles of each of us within the collaborative. As I noted earlier, we all come from different fields and different colleges. We've had different vocations, but we all bring this common interest around these issues. So we first had to determine what is our role in the collaborative, what professional development experience and expertise can we offer to this project, and how can we work so that we can continue to build this and strengthen this in the future. So our long-term goals are to expand this collaborative as a professional resource and repository. We really were hoping that through establishing, building, and strengthening this, that we can be viewed here at Georgia Southern as a collaborative that can provide real resources to local, regional entities who are hoping to train their staff, train their faculty around principles of trauma-informed practice and mental health supports. We're going to establish a repository of these professional development modules online first so that they can be accessed by the local community free of charge and easily accessed so that they can gain opportunity to provide those modules. We're also hoping in the future to be able to provide some on-site training to agencies who may want more of a face-to-face professional development experience on these principles. And we want to expand the representation on this collaborative. Currently, there are the 4 of us. But we would like to see other faculty and other fields join this collaborative. We'd like to get the involvement of some of our students in this work, being able to provide information and being able to access the training. And we'd like to engage community members and also offering not only their participation as recipients of the training, but also engage with us and with their own expertise and helping us strengthen this model. And finally, as we are researchers in our respective fields, we're hoping to engage in action research to assess the outcomes of these models and modules. We want to make sure that we are impacting the community and that we're having success, and those persons that are working with students, particularly students at risk, are able to benefit and see some benefits to their students. So are we seeing student outcomes and student performances, and are we helping create environments in the community that are safe for those students and those youth? We're working on the principles of the 4 R's from SAMHSA, in which this is how we frame our work, not only in trauma-informed practice, but in mental well-being. We start with the idea that it's important to realize first that there is a basic acknowledgement that there is an existence of trauma, that it does have impact on persons' lives, their families, their communities, their professional experiences, their educational experiences. So we start with first working to help people understand that trauma does exist and that does have these particular long-term impacts. Next, we want to help support persons working with youth to recognize signs of trauma. So what are the behavioral signs? What are the cognitive signs, the educational signs, physical and social manifestations of trauma? How can we help persons working with youth in our community recognize those signs to be able to engage in trauma-informed practice? Next, we're hoping to, through these professional development experiences, help those teachers, schools, local communities, local agencies working with youth be responsive to those persons that have experienced trauma? How can we help them establish a commitment to the principles of trauma-informed practice? How can we help them recognize those strategies, those theories, those you know, policies and trainings that need to be involved in order to support students who have experienced trauma. And lastly, we want to make a commitment to resist re-traumatization. So how can we help support, encourage, educate in the local community how to provide safe environments, long-term organizational changes that can really provide these trauma-informed supports. So as we are looking at our work, as we're setting out to develop these modules and engage the local community, these are the 4 tenets that we're going to be looking through. And this is just a reminder to us that we're not just looking at the principles of trauma-informed practice, but we're also connecting that to the overall umbrella of mental wellness. We start with the principle that trauma has been linked to occurrence and presentation of most mental health challenges. So that's the connection we make to mental health and mental wellness in general. We also believe that researchers and practitioners should emphasize early recognition and intervention to prevent these poor outcomes that we know that trauma and challenging mental wellness can promote. We also recognize that there's not been a whole lot of prevention methods that have been widely studied with particularly at-risk low SES populations. So we really want to spend a lot of time devoting to those youth populations. And so as we're engaging in our work and as we're researching the impact, we're going to be looking for, are we making an impact with these particular outcomes? So next we're going to talk about what are the topics that we're hoping to develop and deliver and engage in the first pilot of this collaborative and these professional development experiences. So the first topic that we're going to explore is modules for educators, particularly in higher education. So those faculty, those staff that work in post-secondary education settings, we want to engage with them around topics of defining what is trauma. What does it look like? What are the sources of trauma? What are the kinds of trauma that exist? So a basic understanding of ACEs and what trauma is. And we also want to engage in training about what does trauma do to our bodies, to our brains, to persons in general and people's experiences. How does it impact people professionally? How does it impact people's relationships and their behaviors and adverse behaviors in particular? We want to help this population really hone in on what does trauma look like for post-secondary students. That may look very different than some other populations. So what are some signs? What are some recognition that students have experienced trauma? We want to provide opportunities to develop frameworks for understanding and using trauma-informed educational practices within these post-secondary settings. How can we help the college faculty? How can we help college advisors? How can we help college staff understand what trauma looks like and what are some educational practices that can support these students and encourage their mental well-being? We want to look at educational practices, principles, and concrete examples we want to provide for this population of professionals to be able to help them with their work. So that's the first topic that we've identified in this initial pilot. Secondly, we want to develop some professional development training for educators, particularly in grades P through 12. So, what does it look like for students in school settings, this age group, to be impacted by trauma? How does it manifest itself in the classroom? What does it look like in students' behavior? What does it look like with their educational outcomes? Helping teachers understand that through a frame of trauma-informed practice, you can better understand students' experiences to be able to address their needs to help them be successful. Developing some trauma-informed strategies for teachers that they can employ easily within their classroom, again, to help sustain students' well-being. Understanding the important role that teacher wellness plays in trauma-informed practice and sustaining these mentally healthy classrooms. So what are some strategies to maintaining teachers' professional wellness and personal well-being? And then finally, offering some practices for schools. How can we help? How can we support schools or agencies that want to be trauma informed? What are school-wide practices that engage in this practice? The third topic that we've identified, or the first group of people that we've identified that we want to be able to provide some professional development for, are educators and clinicians. So strategies for reducing burnout and these folks, teachers and clinicians who work directly with challenging youth. How can we help them understand the principles of mindfulness to help their support the students they're working with, but also themselves? Utilizing self-care strategies, following not just self-trauma, but also vicarious trauma. We know that sometimes clinicians and teachers, when they work with traumatized youth, can also experience secondary trauma from working with traumatized folks. So how can we help develop some self-care for these professionals? Understand how to regulate that during their practice, and then providing some mental wellness interventions for these schools and for clinics. So that's the third group or set of professional development that we're hoping to offer through this experience. And then lastly, we want to be able to provide some modules for addressing needs of particular individuals. So how can we help folks recognize and initiate responses to signs of troubled youth? So maybe not working in a school, but working in other agencies in which they're working with youth. How can we help those folks identify signs of a traumatized or troubled child? How can we help agencies, schools, etc., establish anti-bullying environments? How can we help those agencies and schools support them in supporting LGBTQ plus communities, children and adults? How can we offer supports and suggestions for helping to understand gender, sex, and sexuality, androgyny, gender identity issues, transgender issues, issues with sexual orientation, etc.? So for those communities that need those supports, how can we help agencies and schools understand their needs and support them? So those are the first 4 sets of professional development opportunities and modules that we hope to develop through this pilot. Again, we want to thank the NYAR for providing the seed grant for us to be able to do this work and develop these initial modules. And so now what we'd like to do is really get some input from you. As we mentioned, we are seeking to really engage not only the community, but also continue to develop, strengthen, and promote these opportunities And so to do that, we really want to be able to get some input and garner possibilities from everyone, including those participants in the session today. So there are 3 questions that we'd like you to consider as you've heard the work that we're beginning to engage with. One is, what of these topics do you think would be most beneficial to your agency or local organizations? So which of these that we have provided here would really be most beneficial to you, the people that you serve, the students that you serve, the youth that you serve? Are there professional development topics that we have not addressed that you feel like really this collaborative could develop and would be beneficial to the youth in our community or those serving the youth in our community? And in general, what feedback do you have for us? What do you think about this collaborative? What do you think about the possibilities? Um, are there other people that we might want to be engaged with? Again, we are hoping to grow this. We are hoping to establish this collaborative with more faculty from different fields and input from the local community. So any feedback that you have for us on those areas would be most welcome. Finally, we want to thank you for your participation and listening to our presentation today and the work that we're hoping to engage in. Here you will find the emails of all 4 of the members of this collaborative. If you would like, you're interested in the collaborative, you have questions or further feedback, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We would love to hear from you. And, we are excited about this work. And we really do hope that we can make an impact in our community. So thank you very much.